Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure for me to be here. As you heard, I used to work in Switzerland. It always brings very good memories to be back here in this country. I'm also delighted to be speaking at the Jean Monnet Foundation event, also in particular when we're discussing Europe. And what I would like to do is maybe focus on 3 principal points. And I would also like to leave some time for any questions or comments that you may have at the end of my presentation. So let me begin with my first point to set the scene, because I have a very broad mandate in this discussion, which is a perspective from Europe. And when we are thinking about l'avenir de l'Europe dans le monde, the first point I would like to make is that right now, Europe is really at a crossroads. And this happens from time to time, but this is one of those moments where Europe has a clear path and there's one route going one way and another route going the other way. And to put this in perspective, what I would like to do is to remind you the beginning of the first security strategy of the European Union that came out in 2003. And at that point, the theme of that strategy was a secure Europe in a better world. That was where Europe was at that time. And if you go to the beginning of that document, let me just read to you what it said. Europe has never been so prosperous, so secure, no, so free. The violence of the first half of the 20th century has given way to a period of peace and stability unprecedented in European history. That was December of 2003. Now, where are we today? Let me read to you the first few words in the executive summary of the EU Global Strategy, which was the follow-on to the first strategy from 2003. This strategy, known as the EUGS, came out in June of 2016. It was actually presented right after the vote on Brexit, so the timing was impeccable. But what it says from the beginning, and this is why we are now at a crossroads, is we need a stronger Europe. This is what our citizens deserve. This is what the wider world expects. We live in times of existential crisis. That is how we begin. So, as President Cox very eloquently described before, there is a lot of external pressure on Europe and the EU in particular at the moment. And because of that, we find ourselves in a rather polarized Europe. We have those who are very keen on seeing the European project move forward and who believe that to protect and promote the fundamental interests of Europeans at home and abroad, this European project has to continue evolving forward more strongly. And at the same time, we have a very powerful force now, which is saying, no, we do not need a stronger Europe. We need to look at the national level. We need less Brussels. We need to think in terms of nationalism and patriotism. Perhaps the word patriotism can be seen in different ways. So these two polarizing forces are very much placing Europe at a very specific point. Another reason why Europe now is a bit at this crossroads is because one of the preferred tools of the European Union is also under challenge. And that is the tool of multilateralism, i.e. a very strong anchor on the primacy of a rules-based order, the primacy of the UN Charter, the primacy of international collaboration through international institutions. That is under challenge today. And it's a very specific time when the European Union and European countries are looking at challenges like climate change, enabling cybersecurity, and there's a very strong impetus for working together in a multilateral way. So this challenge, of course, is making it difficult for the EU to move forward in the way that it so desires. At the same time, besides the pressures that you see from other powers, and this was also described before, how there's a very strong divide and conquer attitude by countries like Russia and China that are pitting European countries against each other, making it very difficult to move forward in a collaborative manner. There is also a development now of so-called multi-stakeholderism. And the multi-stakeholder approach is quite interesting. It means that to deal with many of the challenges of today, it's not just governments and international organizations that need to be in the table. We need to have the private sector. We need to have civil society. And for challenges like energy security, climate change, cyber, many other issues as well, you need to have all of these actors on the table. So for this reason, Europe is also trying to understand what are the right tools for the right types of effects that you want to achieve. So another reason for why we find ourselves at a very specific moment. This brings me to my second point, which is within the EU now, there is a debate taking shape with respect to strategic autonomy. Now, you might wonder, what does it mean, strategic autonomy? And what is very interesting is that if we would ask everybody in this room what is strategic autonomy, I am confident that there would be not as many answers as the number of people in the room, but there would be many different views on what strategic autonomy is and what it should achieve. And for that reason, this debate now, which is ongoing, not just in Brussels, but in many capitals, is how do we conceptualize it? How do we think about it? How can we move forward with it without defining it? And it is very interesting because if you go back to the EU global strategy, there's several references to strategic autonomy, but one of them says, and I'm quoting here, an appropriate level of ambition and strategic autonomy is important for Europe's ability to promote peace and security within and beyond its borders. End quote. Very important reference to an appropriate level. This is important because for many, there's a belief now that Europe wants to go it alone. There's a belief that strategic autonomy is either you do it or you don't. There's no gray zones. And because of that, there's a lot of tension when you talk about strategic autonomy. There's also a lot of misunderstanding when you speak about strategic autonomy. A lot of individuals, and I know this when we have discussions on this, would much rather not use the term. They would prefer to talk about dependency and what level of dependency do we need in different areas, be it access to strategic minerals, be it our ability to act as we wish when it comes to setting cyber norms. So one thing, though, that is clear is that the debate on strategic autonomy has changed quite a bit over the last couple of years. Traditionally, within the EU or within many European EU member states, the debate on strategic autonomy was about the ability to act more independently on the field for its missions and operations. And this, if you think back, this goes back to a time when the EU started with its missions and operations. It was just after Kosovo, and there was a very strong sense in many European capitals that now was the time that Europe should be able to do better. After that campaign, it was clear that there were some very critical shortfalls in European capabilities on the ground. There was also a strong discussion about the industrial elements of strategic autonomy, promoting European industry, a very strong economic factor. Today, what is very interesting is that the debate has broadened. So if you are discussing strategic autonomy in some capitals of European countries, today the discussion will go beyond the idea of operations and industry. Let me give you some examples. In the political realm, there are discussions now about how Europe wants to maintain and is maintaining the Iran deal. It is a very political decision, and it goes into the idea of decision-making and the ability to make an autonomous decision in an important issue like that. It's very political, and it also has an economic dimension. And as was said before, a stronger role for the euro is also something new now that is being tied to the discussion on strategic autonomy. In fact, you will hear many people talk about economic sovereignty as the specific term. And you know that there have been discussions within Europe now about having its own special purpose vehicles, it's known as INSTEX, that will allow European companies to do business with Iran without having to then feel the effects of American, US recommendations not to do so. So there's a political dimension, there's an economic dimension, and I think maybe we heard before from Mr. Gil Robles about how the evolution of the euro has changed over the last few years. I just want to make reference to one report here, which is a European Commission communication that came out in December of last year. It's entitled Towards a Stronger International Role of the Euro. And it very specifically lays out a roadmap for how that can be achieved. And it also has some very interesting statistics, and some are already referenced, so I will refrain from those. But just to give you actually two statistics that kind of show the divergence in the role of the euro. On the one hand, it is said in this report that around 60 countries and their depending territories either use, will use, or link their currencies to the euro. Think about it, 60 countries and their dependent territories. If that is correct, that is a pretty significant and surprising number. Interesting when we talk about the international role of the euro. On the other hand, let's look at something different. Over 80% of Europe's energy imports are priced and paid in the US dollar. It's a complete different picture with respect to the role of the euro. So when there are discussions now about the economic sovereignty, there's a very strong debate about the role of the euro. Industrial, I think I don't need to say very much, but there are lots of ramifications now when we talk about industry and how that fits into the picture of strategic autonomy. You will know that there was a very strong debate about the merger of Alstom and Siemens with respect to trains. And there was a clear diverging view between the Commission and France and Germany. And France and Germany now, who are not very pleased with how perhaps this is moving forward, have come out with an industrial manifesto where they clearly underline the importance of being a bit more flexible to maybe to enable European champions. Why? To be competitive on a global stage. The European Commission says, well, competition is good. We shouldn't go in the direction of industrial national champions or European champions. Let the market do this. So you can see this tension, and when you look at it from a global perspective, you will understand then why some European countries now are trying to see if there's a way to develop the idea of autonomy or champions in the industrial realm. We can continue with this discussion when we talk about outer space. Many would argue that Galileo is a great example of strategic autonomy. to have a navigation, positioning, and timing system. Some would argue that we need to do the same in the digital domain. Europe has now the GDPR, the General Data Retention Directive. It's probably at the forefront when it comes to data protection. Europe is also very strongly pushing forward discussions on the applicability of international law in cyberspace. It's supporting the UN group of governmental experts that are working on this topic. We can see that there's an interest to understand if Europe has to have a leadership role in this area. So to finalize this second point, I think it would be interesting to think of strategic autonomy as a journey rather than as an endpoint. It's something that is being tinkered with, but if we see it as a journey, it's something that we can build and work on over time, rather than having a very set destination point, because then the destination point will perhaps overtake the journey. And finally, a critical component is the messaging. And here, unfortunately, Europe can do better. Unfortunately, our friends in the United States, many have seen the idea of strategic autonomy as a rather unfortunate development. It's unfortunate because it undermines burden sharing. It undermines the 2% defense investment pledge within NATO, which is a goal for 2024, at least at the political level. But the message should really be that if Europe is able to build its strategic autonomy, it is able to be a more serious contributor to international stability and cooperation. It becomes a better NATO partner. It becomes a better transatlantic partner. And that is the way that the messaging has to come out. And this is one of the reasons why at the Munich Security Conference, it is very likely that my boss, the High Representative Vice President Mogherini, mentioned the word cooperative strategic autonomy or cooperative autonomy, which is, this is something that should be seen as a cooperative tool that facilitates that. My last point before I finish is simply to say that 2019 and 2020 is really a key moment that we need to seize, and we cannot let any kind of strategic pause enter the picture. Why am I saying this? Because clearly, if we look at both external and internal factors, there are many things happening right now that are contributing to a possible strategic pause within Europe. If we begin with the external factors, of course, I've already mentioned to you that Europe is facing a lot of different issues that require careful attention. A resurgent Russia, an increasingly assertive China, continued instability around the periphery of Europe, especially in the MENA region. With so many different things happening at the same time, it is critical that the internal challenges do not detract too much attention. You will have seen that recently there was a lot of discussion in the media about the fact that China was the big winner in the last week, given the discussions that were supposed to be happening about China across heads of government and states, but instead was dominated more about Brexit. I've also discussed the fact that some of these countries are playing a very strategic game of divide and conquer. The discussions on 5G were referenced before. The idea of the Belt and Road Initiative and who signs up to that. How we deal with energy supplies from Russia. Because of these very divisive issues, it is possible that Europe ends up stuck as it needs to move forward. And if we look internally, I don't need to say more than Brexit right now to indicate how much energy has gone towards this. But as we look forward, we have the very important elections to the European Parliament in May. We have new personalities coming in towards the end of the year. A new High Representative, new head of the European Central Bank, new College of Commissioners, new President of the European Parliament. With the arrival of the change of the guard, of course, it is very likely now that the political impetus goes into a low gear. At the same time, we're looking forward to discussions in Sibiu, in Romania, on the 9th of May, where we will be discussing the future of Europe. That is very close. And those discussions are heating up right now. And behind this, overarching all of this, are discussions on the multi-annual financial framework, how the EU will be spending its money over the next 7 years, starting in 2021. Huge issues there to a lot of interesting and important dossiers. So until those negotiations are done, it's likely that you can see a lot of jockeying, you can see a lot of internal energy being spent on those issues, while at the same time Europe is facing a very difficult time. So I try to finish by being some form of a realist with some positive inclinations here, but I very much look forward to your questions and comments, but also how you see the evolution of Europe, dans le monde, but specifically also the European Union as a project. Thank you very much for your attention and look forward to your comments.
Many thanks for your presentation, Mr. Lindstrom. I have so many questions. Maybe let me start with one spontaneous question. When I was in the US and we were discussing about Europe's defense, perspective was totally different. And very often the argument was the Europeans are free riders. They're not spending enough money for their defense. So I have a very simple question for you. Are we free riding on NATO and US? And if so, should we spend more, like Mr. Trump is asking us to do? Or what is the option?
Okay. So this is one big question, of course, so you hit it right on the nail. When we're talking about Europe's place in the world, maybe Europe should be paying more. Maybe there should be more of that happening. But I have a very specific take on this question, which is not everything can be quantified into 2% under NATO and burden sharing that way. I would like to offer that Europe can make a very strong argument and say that Europe is taking responsibility in many other ways that cannot be quantified in that way, be it managing a massive, massive migration challenge that arose in the MENA region after the Arab Spring. You can discuss that, and you can say that Europe, together with the member states, is the biggest contributor to official development assistance. You can say that Europe is a strong contributor to many international organizations, some of them which are working to contain tuberculosis, malaria, other disease. So I don't want to come to the cliche of the United States does the cooking and Europe does the cleaning, because I think that's a very unfair...
Dishwashing.
The dishwashing. I think that's a very unfair characteristic. I think what would be a better way to see it is that we both contribute in different ways, and Europe does contribute in very important ways that we unfortunately sometimes do not do a good enough job explaining to our partners and allies. And I think that many of you in this room would probably have perhaps similar views and could even elaborate more on this. I did a long study a number of years ago on burden sharing, and it was also interesting to break it down by per capita. So if you looked at figures and numbers of troops provided for certain operations and missions, even very small countries were pulling their weight. So the idea of free riding, I fully understand, but I think that when we look at the details, the picture might look a little bit better than some people make it sound. Thank you. Thank you.
And maybe one last question before giving the floor to the public. You've discussed a lot about strategic autonomy, and so my question is it possible to have a strategic autonomy without having a strategic culture? Do we have a strategic culture, a unified strategic culture in Europe, according to you?
You're right. It definitely helps to have a strategic culture, to have a good understanding of strategic autonomy and where you want to go. It is also extremely helpful to agree on your vital interests and how you want to achieve those interests. And I think, as you all know, it's very difficult to do this at the EU level. The EU can speak about values. The EU can speak about strategic objectives. But when we speak about interests, the list can become very long. And that is because it's 28 member states at the moment, and they all have important interests that they want to make sure are met. Having a strategic culture takes time, and hopefully we are moving in that direction. At the highest level, there have been discussions now about a European Security Council. There has been discussions about the need for a European white book on defense. As you know, there are important strategies that the EU has put forward that did not happen before. The EU global strategy was the first of its kind, moving beyond the security realm. The Commission has its security agenda. And we see also a commission that is contributing now in some of the discussions on security and defense. We have a European Parliament that is becoming more keen on an oversight role, rightly so, in the important areas of security. So for this reason, I think that over time, hopefully, there will be a movement towards a stronger strategic culture, but it takes a long, long time. And even with Erasmus, even with the low-cost airlines, even with people going through the European Secure and Defense College courses, even with all the secondments that are happening, also with all the EU delegations, this culture now is being built, but it will take time. And I think the European External Action Service is a very good example of some of the recent efforts to try to build this strategic culture.
Je vous remercie beaucoup, Monsieur Lindstrom. Nous allons donc ouvrir le débat avec la salle. Nous avions une première question ici devant, première rangée, Monsieur de Watteville, et puis ensuite on prendra les autres questions.
Merci. Un petit regard de Pékin d'abord. Quand je vois ce titre, j'étais en poste en Chine il y a quelques années, et à l'époque, ce qui se disait dans les salons chinois, c'est que quand Xi Jinping a un problème avec les États-Unis, il téléphone à Obama. Quand il a un problème avec la Russie, il téléphone à Poutine. Quand il a un problème avec l'Europe, il téléphone à Madame Merkel. Je pense que c'est une anecdote qui ne plairait pas beaucoup à Barroso et Van Rompuy, qui à l'époque présidaient la destinée de l'Union européenne. Mais c'est comme ça que c'était vu par les Chinois. Et ça montre le terrain qu'il faut encore franchir, les progrès qu'il faut encore faire pour que l'Europe soit vraiment perçue comme une entité politique forte. Une entité politique forte. Permettez un regard d'un ancien diplomate suisse. La Suisse a intérêt à une Europe forte. La Suisse a intérêt parce qu'on partage les mêmes valeurs. Et si l'Europe ne défend pas ses valeurs, qui va les défendre? Et quand je vois comment les choses évoluent au niveau global, il y a de quoi être perplexe. Et donc, je pense aux valeurs comme la démocratie, au respect des droits de l'homme, aux soucis concernant le changement climatique et autres, autant d'éléments où l'Europe est à la pointe. Et il faut qu'elle soit entendue, et pour qu'elle le soit, il faut qu'elle ait un impact, et pour qu'elle ait un impact, il faut qu'elle soit forte. Dans le même registre, on a parlé de l'euro tout à l'heure. La Suisse a intérêt à ce que l'euro soit fort, à ce que l'euro soit un succès. Il n'y a qu'à voir quand il y a des doutes sur la solidité de l'euro, les pressions à la hausse sur le franc suisse qui deviennent un cauchemar pour nos exportateurs. Et donc, on a un intérêt égoïste au même titre qu'on a un intérêt aussi commun sur la force de l'euro. Et je reviens à la question que vous aviez posée tout à l'heure sur la relation, disons, le poids de l'euro par rapport au dollar. Et je pense, comme exemple, à la situation avec l'Iran et aux sanctions américaines. Je pense à l'extraterritorialité du droit américain et je pense à l'hégémonie des États-Unis qui me semble être renforcée par le rôle du dollar sur la scène internationale. Est-ce que vous partagez ce point de vue qu'effectivement le rôle du dollar actuellement donne des atouts et des moyens de pression aux Américains qui font défaut à l'Europe? Et est-ce qu'il ne faudrait pas être plus actif pour renforcer le rôle de l'euro, pour être plus indépendant, pour être plus souverain, pour être moins dépendant de la politique américaine? Et à cet égard, je prends juste un exemple. Quand Airbus vend des avions, ils les vendent en dollars. Pourquoi ils ne les vendent pas en euros? Nos matières premières, notre pétrole, on le paye en dollars. Pourquoi on ne le paye pas en euros? Et je pense que nous avons, ça dépend de notre volonté politique et pas seulement des autres, mais aussi de nous-mêmes de pouvoir progresser. Merci.
Monsieur de Watteville, merci pour votre question. Je pense que vous avez eu 2 questions. Je vais essayer de faire ça en français, ça va. La première sur la Chine. Je pense qu'il a été très intéressant de voir les récentes visites de Xi Jinping en Europe, mais plus intéressant a été les meetings à Paris, parce que pour lui, accueillir, ça n'était pas seulement le président Macron. À son côté a été Mme Merkel, a été aussi M. Juncker, a été là. Donc ça a été, je pense, un signal fort pour dire en Europe, maintenant, nous voulions vous donner un différent visage. Quand vous avez du business avec l'Europe, nous sommes un peu plus coordonnés, nous sommes un peu plus ensemble. Je pense que cette optique a été très intéressante. Après, on peut discuter qu'il y a eu un agreement individuel entre la France et la Chine, mais l'optique au début a été très intéressante. Je pense aussi que ça a été intéressant que la Commission a été très claire quand elle a dit que la Chine maintenant c'est un compétiteur. Avant, on n'a pas vraiment vu de langage comme ça. Et donc, on a vu plutôt plus les différents pays de l'Union européenne qui fait son bilatéral avec la Chine. Je pense que ça a changé un peu dans les dernières années, mais en même temps, quand vous avez foreshadowed la position italienne maintenant avec le Belt and Road, c'est intéressant aussi parce que c'est un ancien réflexe qu'on voit. Donc pour moi, c'est un peu, nous sommes en un espace de transition et on va voir si on peut avoir une face unie vers la Chine, que c'est très important parce que dans le futur, on voit clairement que les pays individuels de l'Union européenne, on n'aura pas la même voix qu'on a si on est ensemble avec la voix de l'Union européenne. Ça, c'est très, très important dans le futur. Quand on fait la projection de PIB de la population et choses comme ça. Le deuxième point sur le dollar, vous avez totalement raison. C'est important maintenant que les policymakers font un effort pour un euro fort, un euro stable. Et donc je pense que ce rapport qui vient de la Commission de décembre 2018, c'est très intéressant parce que là-bas, il y a beaucoup de différentes recommandations. Je peux peut-être noter 1 ou 2. Et je pense que quelques-unes auront des résultats plus rapidement, mais il y aura d'autres qui prennent plus de temps. Un instant, je donne seulement un ou deux exemples. The Commission aims to further improve the efficiency of euro area financial markets by ensuring a reliable framework for the production of a full range of trustworthy interest rate benchmarks. Donc ça, c'est un exemple d'une chose qui va passer dans le futur. The Commission will explore the possibility to develop further the role of the euro in foreign exchange markets. Ça continue, hein? C'est une liste vraiment grande de choses. Initiatives linked to the international financial sector. In order to lead by example, European bodies and mechanisms should be encouraged to increase their share of debt denominated in euro. The Commission, together with member states and relevant EU bodies, will engage with global partners for an increased use of the euro. Donc il y a beaucoup d'idées maintenant, mais ça va prendre un peu de temps. Mais c'est bien de voir que du côté suisse, il y a l'entrée de soutenir la stabilité, mais aussi cette valeur. Parce que l'Union européenne, oui, il voulait continuer avec cette valeur. C'est très, très important, cette valeur de la freedom of expression, human rights, online, offline. Toutes ces choses, ça continue très fortement. Mais il faut trouver le toolbox approprié pour le soutenir.
Je vous remercie. Il y a plusieurs mains qui se lèvent. Alors, on va donner un petit peu la parole de ce côté, peut-être.
So, about strategic and defense reinforcements and coordination in Europe, it is a very important subject, and we should progress. But we have currently some major problems in this area. First major problem is Brexit. It's inconceivable to speak of strategic and defense politics in Europe without the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is a main piece of that. So, first problem. The second problem is the German politics of exporting armaments. This is a bit governed by the street. And so that's a difficulty. The street, the ecologists, and they are a bit governing the German politics in this domain. And this is a major obstacle because to have a strong European defense industry, it must be also a strong exporter. And if the German politics prevents exporting armaments, that's a major problem also. So we are faced at least with these two, just currently now, with these two problems. How can we deal with that?
If I may ask just one follow-up question. Does Europe need an integrated military industry? Follow-up question.
Okay, I will answer in English because I'm more clear, and I will be more brief because I saw a lot of hands go up. So security and defense, of course, the Brexit will have serious implications for European EU capabilities. I mean, UK is the biggest defense budget at £35 billion per year. They have very strategic equipment, very good planning capabilities, a lot of experience. But let's not forget, the UK is not leaving Europe completely. There's a long history here, and there will be cooperation. There have been discussions on everything from how access to Galileo is maintained, how there can be future collaboration, perhaps through the PESCO, the Permanent Structured Cooperation Projects, which were mentioned before. There are 34 of them right now. So while it is a big impact on Europe, I wouldn't say it's the end of it in the security and defense arena. The German arms industry policy, I was at the Munich Security Conference. This was a question for Madame Merkel. I would prefer to leave that question simply to say that many countries in Europe have very specific points when it comes to export policy. And given the fact now that many platforms in Europe have pieces from different countries, it is a challenge. I agree with you. We need to try to resolve this. I think that I will leave it at that. The final point I would like to make is to simply acknowledge, as President Cox said before, Europe in the last 2 years has advanced quite a bit with initiatives. The permanent structured cooperation, to have projects, but also the binding commitments. Let's forget the projects for now. The 20 binding commitments about spending more on defense, to sharing more on programs, to look for more collaboration. That is a big deal. The coordinated annual review, it's also supposed to help with the planning. And the European Defence Fund, hopefully a carrot. So as these initiatives are put together on things such as military mobility and are implemented, it will have a big impact for European security and defense. And let's not forget EU-NATO cooperation. It's going quite well right now. We have 2 recent joint declarations in July 2016 and July 2018. We have 74 common actions dealing with hybrid threats, cyber exercises, a lot of different issues. So that's quite good. So here I'm a bit more reassured when it comes to the security and defense dossier, looking forward. Finally, on integrated defense industry, that's a long road to go. Right now, we need to focus on less fragmentation. So that's step 1. Let's have less, where we can, less fragmentation and duplication, and then eventually we'll get to the next kind of harder part of integration.
Thank you. Alors, on a une question au fond. Monsieur qui demande la parole, là, voilà.
Quand on parle de l'autonomie stratégique, on peut difficilement éviter d'évoquer la dimension du nucléaire. Actuellement, et depuis longtemps, l'Europe vit, les membres occidentaux et européens de l'OTAN vivent dans le système de la dissuasion offerte par les Américains, avec une composante stratégique et une composante tactique. En plus, il y a la force nucléaire française qui est totalement autonome et la force nucléaire britannique qui est aux 3/4 autonome. Ce que j'ai compris, et là vous allez me confirmer ou m'affirmer, c'est que notre cher président américain menace ou annonce la fin des accords de limitation tactique et stratégique à terme. C'est-à-dire que, est-ce que ça veut dire qu'on va aller vers une nouvelle course aux armements et qu'on va reprendre les épouvantables tensions et conflits que l'Europe a connus avec la crise des euromissiles, où là, nous avons failli perdre, dans certains pays de l'Union, l'autonomie stratégique morale et mentale, parce que les manifestations des neutralo-pacifistes a fait que nous étions peut-être en train de basculer en n'admettant pas l'implantation des Pershing face au SS-20 et donc en étant totalement, je dirais plus finlandisé, mais neutralisé stratégiquement. Alors, est-ce que vous pensez que, au-delà des gesticulations de Trump, il y a un risque d'un découplage nucléaire stratégique entre la partie européenne de l'OTAN et les États-Unis? Dans ce cas-là, dans le pire des scénarios, puisqu'on parle quand même à très long terme de l'autonomie stratégique de l'Europe, est-ce qu'on peut envisager une force nucléaire européenne basée sur un élargissement de la dissuasion éventuellement franco-britannique ou française? Est-ce que là, on est dans un total, je dirais, rêve, ou bien est-ce que, si on veut vraiment voir à très long terme, il y a une logique de l'autonomie stratégique de l'Europe et sur le plan nucléaire? Évidemment, on ne peut pas y échapper.
Alors, on va peut-être prendre encore une deuxième question. Oui. Bon, ouais, là, voilà. Ouais, commence.
Okay, yes. Hi. Macy Marvel. I'm a journalist from Geneva. My question is about Russia, and what's your assessment of the supposed threat of Russia to Europe? What do you think their strategic objectives are? Because finally, this is what's really important for this whole question of free riding, isn't it, vis-à-vis the United States?
Je vous remercie. Peut-être qu'on va profiter encore de l'occasion pour poser une troisième question, madame.
Oui,
Attendez, le micro arrive. Voilà.
Apparently, there are also initiatives going on separately on defense in Europe. For example, the project Intermarium. This project of cooperation on defense between countries from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, supported by the US, directed against Russia. There is something concrete in this project, or is a fake news? And how this kind of project can fit in a common foreign and defense policy agreed by all European countries?
Voilà, je vous remercie. On va peut-être répondre déjà à ces trois questions et puis ensuite peut-être prendre une dernière question.
Very basic and simple questions, starting with nuclear, of course. But no jokes, this is a big and serious issue, and the INF Treaty, I think, brought it home to a lot of Europeans. Here we are, impacted by a bilateral treaty that probably has very large implications for Europe, and we're looking at it. And it reminds us that this is a very large and important topic. Unfortunately, if we're trying to link the nuclear dossier with strategic autonomy, that is probably not going to go very far, because right now it is pretty much a topic that nobody wants to talk about. I think in Germany, there was a few months ago, maybe it was more than half a year ago, a debate that came up very quickly, which was to the effect of, does Germany need the nuclear bomb? And it came out of, it was a very strong emphasis coming from an academic who pushed this debate forward. But it came very quickly, and then it also disappeared after a couple of weeks, at least from the international media focus. And that is very indicative of any time in any fora where it comes up, the discussion about deterrence, the use of nuclear weapons, and their role in security and defense in the 21st century. And in Europe, it's just a difficult topic. We have very different views across different European countries. We have some countries like Austria that have a very strong position in one area regarding moving away from nuclear weapons. And on the other side, we have, for example, countries focusing very much that, for example, within NATO, it remains a nuclear alliance, and there is a role for nuclear weapons for deterrence and extended umbrella protection. So within Europe, this is a difficult subject to speak about. And for that reason, combining it with strategic autonomy, even though it should be done, I think will be very difficult. You asked very specifically if there are risks for decoupling. And I would say that there are some risks, but I would hope that we don't get to that point. I think that we are still some distance away from that kind of decoupling, especially because within NATO it's very clear that that remains an alliance with a nuclear component for the foreseeable future, while other countries have nuclear weapons. But again, in Europe, the discussion about the humanitarian implications, moving towards a weapons-free world, but also seeing the value in some countries for these weapons, means that the debate needs to continue, but it is very, very difficult. With respect to Russia, unfortunately, this is also one of those areas where European countries have different views on the Russian threat. I would say countries, and as is probably well known in this room, countries from the region where I come from, which is Sweden, if you ask them to list the key threats, they might put Russia very high up on their list. They might put it 1, they might put it 2, and they might put it as number 3. That's what Finland did when they were asked to list the top 3 threats. This is not shared in other parts of Europe. They can see Russia as somebody who's difficult to deal with, but we appreciate the ability to get some access to energy. And for that reason, we will have a realpolitik relationship with Russia. All member states, of course, in 2014, and what happened in Crimea and eastern Ukraine, that was a big wake-up call. And I think that was one of those moments where all member states, most European countries, if not all of them, saw that this was a big problem. That was 5 years ago. 5 years have passed, and of course, it's a non-linear process. The view of Russia as a threat is going up and down as we speak over the coming weeks and months. So for that reason, it's very difficult to give you a good answer. I think that the discussions that have been happening with Russia on 4 common spaces or 5 areas or 5 policy points that the EU pushes when it comes to its relationship with Russia, they are long-standing and there have not been many changes to it in a long time. So it is a little bit of a back and forth. Madam, you raised a very interesting point, which I actually neglected to raise to a previous question when it came to security and defense. There are many initiatives ongoing right now, somewhat outside of the auspices of the European Union. And you mentioned one, but I think the European Intervention Initiative is another one, which is also very much in the forefront right now. And it is supposed to contribute to this strategic culture of when to intervene and how to intervene. And while I'm not very familiar with the one that you have mentioned, I've heard of it, so I will prefer not to comment on it. But what I would like to do is simply to acknowledge to you that you are correct. There are many different formations that are out there that are supposed to be contributing to stability and security. It can be police forces such as the Euro-Gent 4, the European Gendarmerie Force, all the way to this European Intervention Initiative. So thank you for raising that. And I think many of these are work in process. And there are also important bilateral arrangements such as those under the Lancaster House agreements between the UK and France that are very important and will continue to be important. So thank you for raising that.
Je vous remercie. Il y avait peut-être une dernière question. Là, l'ambassadeur Reiterer, dernière question, parce que le temps passe.
Thank you. Well, perhaps more as a comment. I'm having left Switzerland. I'm now in Korea, the Korean Peninsula, which has its challenges, which are more related to hard security. However, and I would like to bring this element, footnote, as an appetizer for my speech tomorrow, because I'm the last one to speak. There is a lot of interest on actually what Europe is doing in security matters. The Joint Chiefs of Staff of Korea is interested to go to the European Military Committee and to learn more about the integrated approach. They are interested to learn more about the military and civil cooperation. They are interested how we managed, and they see the strategic element of Galileo, because this is an alternative, for the time being the only alternative to the GPS system. There's a lot of interest also in setting of standards, because that's also part of security. Now, the international data protection, where the European standard is becoming an international standard, is of big interest.
And they also see, for example, the standard setting for batteries as an extremely important element, because batteries is not just for a car, but for if you manage to store energy. There are a lot of military components to it, and therefore I get a lot of questions on that. And perhaps at last, Gustav, just you have not mentioned one element of the data you quoted. If you take the defense budgets of all our member states together, this is the second largest budget worldwide after the Americans and before the Chinese. So smart use, and that's what we are trying to achieve, not least also through the European Defence Agency. There we can see that we have a lot of room to improve, and the important element is we don't have to throw so much money into it. We just have to use the money more efficiently than we do right now.
Well, Ambassador Reiter, thank you for also throwing in that small footnote of Asia. I think there will be a lot of interest to hear what you will be saying tomorrow. And simply just to note that, yes, there is this interest, and for that reason, Europe, the European Union, hopefully is now moving forward in facilitating some of those discussions. I was personally in Singapore just a few months ago, and there were, for the first time, facilitated also by the EU delegation, discussions on maritime security, cybersecurity, and counterterrorism, which had not happened before. So it was an interesting point. And I think last year within the EU, the Council conclusions in May and June had some indications about potential stronger European engagement in Asia-Pacific within the security dimension. So look, I should probably not speak any more about that because you will be covering that tomorrow. But simply to say that hopefully we are managing that properly as we move forward. I think that I will finish with that. I don't think that there was anything else that was raised. Nope.
Je vous remercie donc et je laisse la parole à Monsieur Cox.
Je vous remercie. Donc, vous avez besoin d'un grand discours de conclusion, n'est-ce pas? Mais on court le risque de vous décevoir. Alors, quelques très petites remarques. Je me souviens très bien la phrase du doyen des gourous de management aux États-Unis en avant dans son décès, Peter Drucker, qui nous a dit que la culture mange la stratégie pour le petit déjeuner. Et donc, cette idée de la culture est en effet très importante pour faire valoir une stratégie. Deuxième remarque, en ce qui concerne l'Europe et les réseaux sociaux en ligne, les standards européens, qui deviennent de plus en plus, comme vous avez dit, des standards plus mondiaux, est un standard qui traite le sujet de consommation des services en ligne comme citoyen, et les États-Unis traitent les sujets plutôt comme consommateurs. Et donc l'idée de citoyenneté en ligne, c'est une idée vraiment européenne, et ça avance. Donc un pouvoir non négligeable dans les années qui viennent. Troisième chose, on a parlé du Brexit et la politique de la sécurité et de la défense avec beaucoup de questions. Moi, je pense, comme hypothèse, qu'au point de vue de la politique financière et le rôle de cité à Londres, que l'Europe va approfondir ses propres capacités après le départ du Royaume-Uni sur ce plan-là. Donc, ça va ajouter quelque chose à la capacité financière sur les marchés du capital en Europe. Et quatrième chose, je fais beaucoup de travail comme coordinateur sur le plan stratégique de transport en Europe pour la Commission et les institutions européennes. Et nous comptons, dans les années qui viennent, sur une partie du budget pour la défense en Europe pour aider à ajouter à la qualité de l'infrastructure pour la mobilité militaire. Nous avons des ponts ou des ports qui ne portent pas la vraie capacité de faire passer à vitesse avec le poids des trucs militaires. Donc, tout cela. C'est très intéressant que même dans le domaine de la politique de transport, on attend quelques billions d'euros pour les années qui viennent pour cette partie de la politique. Alors, il faut évidemment remercier les conférenciers, notre ami Gilles Robles, M. Gustav Lindstrom, Cenni Najy pour sa présidence de son rôle de modérateur. J'aimerais bien, comme d'habitude, remercier l'Université de Lausanne et ses services. Je tiens également, de notre part, à adresser mes remerciements au Fonds national suisse de la recherche scientifique, au quotidien 24 heures et à l'hôtel Victoria pour leur soutien. Nous avons besoin de nos parents aussi. Et puis, je vous donne rendez-vous demain dès 9h30 pour la suite du colloque dans cette même salle. Et maintenant, je vous invite à l'apéritif situé juste à l'extérieur. Et donc, je vous souhaite une excellente soirée. Merci beaucoup.